Hi, today I'm going to be talking about the MP curve in the ISMP model. So, what is the ISMP model in the first place? It's a model that helps to understand the business cycle. It answers questions like why does real GDP change in the short run and effects of fiscal and monetary policies. It also assumes that prices and wages are sticky in the short run. So, the model is made up of three curves: the IS curve, the MP curve, and the PC curve. So, we're going to be talking about the MP curve. What is the MP curve? It represents central bank's monetary policy. Also, central banks influence interest rates. So they set short-term nominal interest rate, which is also called the overnight rate, which influences long-term real interest rate. This can also impact the output gap. So, what are term structure and term premium? So, to understand the difference between short-term nominal interest rates and long-term real interest, term structure is a relationship between interest rates of similar bonds but different maturities. So interest for long-term bond is equal to average expected interest rates on future short-term bonds plus the term premium, which is the interest that is demanded by investors for taking the risk of the long-term bond. So like investors believe about short-term interest rates. Um, so we have short-term nominal interest rates versus long-term real interest rates. They're different because number one, expectations of future short-term interest rates, and second, the term premium. So term structure effect, which is a TSE, is a combination of these two factors. So we have in our formula, long-term interest rates is equal to short-term interest rates plus the premium. We also have the risk structure and default risk premiums, or DP. So to understand the difference between short-term normal interest rate and long-term real interest, we have the risk structure, which is the relationship between interest rates of different bonds but same maturities. So difference here is determined by default risk, which is a chance that interest will not be paid back, which causes investors demand, which means that investors will demand different default risk premiums. And then we have our longer terms, which is a higher default risk premium because there's more risk, right? So we have our short-term nominal interest rates versus long-term real interest rates. That's relationship between the interest rates determined by the TSE and DP. So in our formula, we have the long-term interest rate is equal to our short-term interest rate plus a TSE plus a DP. So knowing the formula for real interest rates, we can expand and manipulate it. So this will be crucial to our MP curve. So once we do that, we get a different formula, which is our real long-term interest rate is equal to our short-term nominal interest rate plus the TSE plus the DP minus our expected inflation. So what shifts our MP curve? MP depends on central bank's short-term nominal interest rate, TSE, DP, and future expected inflation. So changes in output gap is equal to movement along the horizontal MP, which is increase in real GDP. So as we discussed the formula, once we look at it, shift up in our curve, in our MP curve, is when TSE interest rate or DP increase, or expected inflation decreases. And as a result of all this, R will increase, a real long-term interest rate. And then it's vice versa. If we want to shift it down, TSE, I, and DP have to decrease, or expected inflation needs to increase. And as a result, our real long-term interest rate will decrease. And we can see that in the formula. So let's do an example. So people believe that inflation will be lower in the future. How will this affect real interest rates and the output gap and the shift of the MP curve? So um, I made a graph here. We can see that expected future inflation is lower. That means real interest rates will increase. Therefore, that means it's a shift up in the MP curve, as we discussed, and the output gap must be negative. And again, as we said, real interest rates also increase. So we can see in our graph that we go from Y1, which is our equilibrium one, where output gap is zero, since our MP is shifting upwards to MP2, our our y is our equilibrium is shifting, and we have an output gap of -3%. So our output gap is negative, and that's my citation. Thank you for listening.